So else ifs, also called, and in fact, the keyword is called Elif. So we call it an else if in other languages, but here we're going to use a keyword called Elif, or elf, as some people will pronounce it. It's a structure that we use inside of Python. Let's do a slightly different example. In this example, I want to know, instead of whether or not you're speeding, let's say I have one of those, which in San Diego are now illegal, but let's have one of those cameras that takes a picture of your license plate and gives you a ticket. And we want to figure out how much to fine you if you're driving too fast. And it's going to be a variable kind of fine, meaning if you're driving just over the speed limit, it's one fine. If you're driving way over the speed limit, it's a bigger fine. So we want to know, one, did you go over the speed limit? Because if you didn't go over the speed limit, then I don't want to penalize you. But if you did, whether it's raining or not, we're going to say 40. We're going to compute a fine. And then I want to know by how much we're going to fine you. So let's make a function, compute fine, and we're going to pass it a speed. And for now, I'm just going to return 0. If you keep wondering why I'm dropping in all of those semicolons at the end, that's just habit from every other language I've ever used, C, C++, Java. You don't need colons, semicolons at the end of the lines in Python, though. Believe it or not, it doesn't hurt, though. So first, I want to do a little thing. I'm going to show you this. This is an important thing of part of programming. This is called a comment. Comments are extremely important for documenting our code. And documenting our code makes code more readable. And readable code is good code because we read more code than we write. Imagine if everything I ever wrote in this class was terribly written and you just had to sit there and going, why can't I read this? Well, that's what it's like for us when we read your homework. Comments help us explain things. And occasionally we use comments to say, well, what is this function's purpose? And I want to know what the purpose of this function is. Computing the fine given the speed. And based on the speed, let's put in the penalties. And by the way, that is a pound symbol. For those of you who are not familiar with the pound symbol, which is from phones, it's actually the hashtag symbol now. It has been co-opted by social media to be the hashtag, but it's called the pound symbol. If you're less than 40, there's no fine. We don't penalize you. However, if your speed is between 41 and 50, then we're going to penalize you $100 fine. And if your speed is higher than that, meaning you're really going too fast, then we're going to fine you $200. So we've now given you ourselves, the programmer, a set of ranges to fill in, and we need to figure out how to write this. So we should know how to write this pretty easily by now, at least initially. If speed is less than or equal 40, there's no fine. We don't fine anybody. But if they're over that, at this point we know the speed is greater than 40. We know that, which means we know at this point that they've now committed a minor crime and we have to get money from them. So we're going to fine them at this point. Well, we have two options up here, right? We have these two options, and one is going to be a $100 fine, and one's going to be a $200 fine. And so I want to use these cases here in the comments, and I want to use those cases to write another if statement. So I'm doing nesting on this one. If it's less than or equal 50, then the fine is 100, right? So we know we're greater than 40, which means we're at least 41 here. So we know we're between 41 and some other number. And so if it's 50 here, we know we're going to be between 41 and 50. And if it's beyond 50, it means it's at least 51. and we fine them $200. And then eventually we're just going to return the fine. So less than equal 40, no fine. Speed greater than 40, which means it's at least 41, but less than equal 50, well, that's the second case. It's a $100 fine. Anything after that's a $200 fine. So we could run this, and now let's actually see what happened. Compute fine for 0. Okay, no fine there. That's fine. 20 miles an hour, no fine. 30, no fine. What about 45? Well, I expect to be fined for that. That's a $100 fine. Okay, well, what about 55? Okay, that's a $200 fine. So the 45, so the 0, the 20, and the 30, they all were true right here, and so the fine was 0. At the 45, this was false, but this was true, and so fine was 100. And at 55, this was false, this was false, and this was true, and so fine was 200. So that's what happening. And so we ended up with this structure right here with this nested if inside of it. But the fact that we have this nested if along with the singular if at the top that is not nested, it's such a common structure that there's a construct for it in Python, and it's called the Elif or else if or whatever you want to call it. And we can rewrite this code in a better way. And I don't want to erase this. So I want to do a side-by-side comparison. So I'm just going to make a new one. And I'm going to clean things up a little bit. We don't need that comment there right now, just so we can compare what I'm going to do in a second. But I want to be able to show you the difference between these two. So if we look at the second one here, and we grab this to this, and we delete it, we get this new Elif thing. And what Elif does is it basically says else if, is really what it's saying, else if. Let me fix the indentations. And so now we're saying if the speed is less than or equal 40, fine is 0. Else, if the speed is less than or equal 50, fine is 100. If neither of those true, the fine is 200. So now you can see the original code with the nested if in it, right? We had this nested if. We've now turned it into what's kind of a chain of things here of else if, and we can do multiples of those, by the way. But they do the exact same thing, right? If I run this, we're going to have the exact same answer. So let's actually do 55 is 200, 45 is 100, 30 is 0. So it runs the exact same way. It's just a different way of writing this without using the nesting, right? We didn't want to use the nesting, or we don't need to use the nesting. And we could actually add as many of these scenarios we want. So for example, maybe if it's between 51 and 60 is 200, and then if you're going more than 60 miles an hour in a 40 zone, maybe it's something dramatic like 200, 300 or 500 or something crazy. So now let's do 45 is 100. 55 is 200, and 65 is, actually, did I not save it? Oh, you know what? I was calling the wrong method. No one caught me. There's a 300. There's the 200. There's the 100. And there's the 0. So we now have 4. We can continue to add cases. Think about grades. You have, I'm going to ignore minuses, but the A range, not counting minuses, is between 90 and 100. The B range is 80 to 89. The C range is 70 to 79. The D range is 60 to 69. And the F range is below 60. Not counting the minus signs. You could actually add the minus signs, but you could write the same thing using that kind of structure. It's just a little bit easier than having to do a whole bunch of if, else, and then inside here an else, and then another if else, and it just kind of flattens it out. It's a little bit easier to read, not completely easier, but it's a little bit easier to read. And it works a little bit better, especially when it's kind of like, we really had 3 scenarios, or now we have 4 scenarios. And we really didn't need to do a nest here because they're all kind of the same thing. Unlike the other example, where we really had 4 different scenarios, I could rewrite this using Elif, but I would have to do compound statements with ands to do it, but I could. Questions on that?